So you've done the self-help and you've dipped into some personal development, but now you ask the question, now what? What can you do? Well, if you want to escape the apathy, step right this way. So twice a year, I teach a course called AUTONOMY. It's a 12-week personal development and training course. What people get out of it is multifaceted. There's curriculum, there's exercises, there's camaraderie, you make new friends. There's a whole lot of interesting things. We're going to hear a sample from the course right now, and let's take a look at the value these students are getting.
The two boiler room speeches.
Yeah.
I like that movie. What's wrong with what's his face? Ben Affleck's speech.
What's
it's a good
wrong
pump
with...
up speech. It's the first time you meet him, you understand the sort of attitude that they wanted. Why is that wrong?
I think it's a poor case of how to do things insofar as all the things that Ben Affleck is using to motivate those young nascent salespeople are the wrong things. And the right things aren't nearly as sexy as Ferraris and houses on the North Fork of Long Island and these sort of things. So he's starting with an appeal to materialism, which might be passable if I didn't know the rest of the story in that movie and the lack of integrity in the products and services, which Ben Affleck definitely knew about in his character position. And then that ties in with the Vin Diesel clip that we saw at the end, where Seth is trying to get somebody on the phone. He gets that doctor. So he has a recommendation, and that turns it over to a senior broker who doesn't even need to know that. Shut up, kid. I don't even need to know the situation. He says these words. He says this cadence. It's a script. And it's much like the, what's the dude's name? The dude from Wolf of Wall Street, the real guy that it's based on. If you go check him out, like he made his bones from like selling sales scripts and stuff like that. So a script is like, it's like an NPC thing. You're not being there, conscious, present, caring for the other person in any way, shape, or form. And they're doing something that's like, that's why they call it a boiler room.
I'm actually seeing it from being able to see it with a 2020 perspective. I get it. Like it's definitely like unethical and sort of like aggressive, and it doesn't work because it's sort of like promising the thing that you can't get, you can't reach. But in the same way, even in the Glengarry Glen Ross, you say abandonment of excellence. What's wrong with the other guy's speech?
What Pacino says?
No, the other one.
Alec Baldwin?
Alec Baldwin. Because he's sort of motivating the people. It's a lot of like negative. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm losing the words.
No, the gist is he's motivating them with negative reinforcement. He's basically saying,
reinforcement.
You guys are all fired. The
Yeah.
best you could hope for is if you get first place, you get the Cadillac. Second place, steak knives. Third place is you're fired and you have to go find another job. And there's like 6 people in that room. So only like four of those people that night are getting fired, basically. And that's what the whole movie's about. And one of them gets so desperate they rip off the Glengarry leads.
Yeah.
Now that stack of pink cards, right? This is back in the early 90s. So that stack of pink cards with the gold stuff around, like the bow on it, those could have been $100,000. Okay. $100,000 for a stack of cards with names and numbers of people who are going to buy the real estate. Through the movie, the people who steal the cards, who don't know the real value of the cards, I think they sold them for like $5,000. And that was you sold those to Jerry Graff for $5,000, like the whole thing that goes on in the movie. And then you're like, wow, if these people were smarter, you wouldn't plunder the production. You wouldn't do these sort of things, but then you would also know the value of the thing that you're purveying in the market,
Right.
So there's a lot of layers to that. And you can watch that movie over and over from a sales perspective and see all sorts of, like Al Pacino's character is set out as the best salesperson, but he's ripping that guy off. But he did tell him the truth that the check was not cashed. It's on Kevin Spacey's desk. Kevin Spacey lies. Oh, your check went to the bank. And that's why Pacino says, never open your mouth until you know what the shot is. The shot is this guy freaks out if it went to the bank. So don't make up a lie. We're fine telling the truth is what Pacino was saying. Right. So did that answer your question?
Well, no, but it's okay. Yes.
No,
yes,
let's try it again.
I know where you were going with. I was just as a I guess a motivating speech at the beginning. doing a little bit of negative reinforcement, is that such a bad thing? That's I guess that's where I was sort of going for.
I guess it comes down to personal tendency, but if I was in that sales room and somebody talked to me, I would not be working there like that. Like, I wouldn't work under those circumstances. I wouldn't work where somebody talked like that to me. There's a whole bunch of like self-respect things, but I also have the mobility to go and purvey my services someplace else. So the guys in that room didn't have any other option, which is why they take it.
Okay.
All right, cool.
Cool.
Who else has a question? Or two?
Could I just add something to that?
Please do. We also allow subtraction, multiplication, division tonight.
And that is the idea that you can't get to ethical ends by unethical means. And so if you're doing unethical things, even with the intention of having an ethical end, you end up falling short. And for the most part, it is the daily practice that ends up with what the results are. And so this is something that applies to this situation as well, that even if they're trying to do the right thing, by doing the wrong thing in the interim, like criticism, for example, for the most part, criticism and even rewards are manipulative, and manipulating people is not how you get things really done.
Now, if I could cite some scripture on this, let's see how this works. An ethic is an attempt to make a positive change, but there are invalid ethics. So somebody might be trying to protect the children at the schools, so they put this new thing in, but that actually allows predators to prey on the schools in some way they didn't understand. So they had a good ethic, and as far as their intention was good, but they didn't know by doing this thing they actually worsened the situation. So that's what you call an invalid ethic. And I learned that on Bob Podolsky's page, titanians.org, which is a whole code and set of ethics and how ethics works. And I think that's the format or structure around which he built his like 12-week ethics course that we made in season, I think 1 or 2 that was. So there's a lot more to what Mike just said. And Mike has been mentored by Bob for some years now. So he's quite conversant in these topics. So if you guys have deeper wishes for articulations on that, you hit up Mike Nimitz. Do you have anything to add, Mike?
There's also another book, I think it's called Punished by Rewards, or something along those lines. I think it's something Cohen is the author.
Yeah. On the flip side of like the negative reinforcement talk, the people can also be punished by over rewarding and rewarding things that they shouldn't be rewarded for.
Yeah, just the idea of manipulating people rather than serving people's needs.
And there's a big market in learning how to manipulate people out there. Sadly, I don't see a need for that market, except there's a big need in the market that's a vacancy, like a void that's created by schooling, by not giving us the tools that we got, for instance, tonight. And in the absence of these tools, there are going to be lesser ways to achieve those ends, and they're not going to be as ethical or nearly ethical at all. But they could be, and they can be now. It all depends on our actions in the world. Good points, Mike. Any other sub points to that?
Richard, I guess what I would add to that is, and this is just from my own experience, but when you strive for excellence, in a lot of cases, when you introduce that idea to a lot of people, for the most part, they see that as doing something extra. It's like they say, "Oh man, I'm busy, man. I'm already busy." And doing all these things, and now you're asking me to go one more step up to, but it, like when I'll give you an example. When I was constructing buildings, and I had a framer that did a pretty poor job of framing, and so I would go out there with a punch list, and I would just tear it apart, and say, "Oh, you're going to have to redo all this stuff. All these things you're going to have to do." And he's going, "Are you kidding me?" But the thing is once I had his crew trained, he was framing a building in in about 3 weeks. When we got it straight, when he was doing it right the first time, he could do it in 5 days. And that tripled his productivity.
Well, and there's time, there's cost of materials, there's frustration, there's labor, there's a whole bunch of things that come into that. So the question is, if you don't do something with excellence, let me put it like this: if you don't do something with excellence, you're taking the risk of not meeting the general specifications. So it doesn't have to be beyond Mike's specifications, but if it's not up to it, it needs to be torn apart and done again. So you want to do it with excellence so that when he does come and inspect it, it passes easy peasy. And that has to do with the squareness of your framing, the length of cuts, the amount of fasteners, and the consistent use of fasteners in all these areas. Not too much, not too little, and hitting that sweet spot. And then also the timing of when to erect certain things and coordinating crews to be able to do that. So good point. You're a project manager for construction, so you know these things well.
But what I'm saying though is like when you're in that moment, when you're saying, hey, you're going to have to tear that apart and do it again.
Yeah.
For the most part, they're not seeing the value that you're creating by raising the standard.
Yeah.
And, being able to create that understanding is really the key to communicating and being able to do that. In those days, I would just say, hey, you're not going to get paid. You're going to have to do it my way, or you're just not going to get paid. Shit, we'll do it. But in a lot of cases, when you're talking about sales, it's a lot. It is much more finesse to get people to see the value that you're trying to bring about.
Yeah, I also want to bring up that clip we played with Grant Cardone on the phone with the client, right? Now the client's pushing him off saying, we're not organized enough right now to be able to spend that money. And he just wanted to get to the point where he would have the client say, we're fine with spending 1.6 million, not fixing this problem for the next 6 months. Because Grant's willing to let him go. If they're fine with that, he's willing to let him go. But once that guy's like, shit, that's costing us more. And I'm betting for Grant to call a customer like that, it's $100,000 deal, $200,000 deal, something like that, right? So about 10% of what he's going to make them. So if he's making them 1.6 million or whatever over 6 months, he's probably taking 160K for his sales team to do that, something like that, right? And if he doesn't call and have that conversation, it's a someday maybe for that client. But if he calls and has that conversation, it's 9 times out of 10 they're going to figure out. Because if they don't know how to figure it out right then, they're going to make a call to management and say, hey, not fixing this problem is costing us a lot of money. What do you want me to do? And somebody else will say, make it happen. Because they, fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders and publicly traded corporations, right? Like there's rules in place. And it's like, if it's going to make more money, you got to do it. So a lot of interesting layers and nuances that you get into once you start practicing in the dojo. Like that seems very vanilla. You guys are going to start with autonomy, but then people are going to bring in their own offers, their own products or projects, and they're going to work on their sales too, because this is part of what you guys are bringing to the dojo. So you start with something we're all familiar with, but if you have your own product or service, I encourage you to get your elevator pitch, get your talk down about this, warm yourself up for creating a webinar and doing interviews and going on tour, whatever you need to do in the future. Start those things with that seed now, so you can have that big thing develop, over months in advance.
Everyone's doing some kind of self-help these days, and you can find a million self-help courses out there. Most other courses out there are hosting lectures, they're hosting videos, they're maybe even doing Q&As, and these are great starting points to encourage learning. But at AUTONOMY, we believe that hands-on practice is the best way to really lock in what we're learning. There's no better way to gain confidence and mastery than through action. After each lecture, we practice the concepts we've learned with other students, giving and receiving feedback in a non-judgmental environment. The result is mastery of concepts like entrepreneurship, ethical sales, and self-reliance in an environment that directly translates to the real world. Plus, you make connections with other like-minded individuals who are learning right alongside you, and you have a lifetime membership in the community. The Autonomy course with Richard Grove equips you with confidence, competence, and courage in a world filled with confusion and noise. You can learn more at getautonomy.info. We'll see you there.